Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Guide. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe you've had a long day of thinking and moving and being, or maybe you're simply the kind of person who likes to drift off while pondering the deep patterns woven through life itself. Either way, this journey is for you. You don't need to do anything now but rest. Let your breath slow, your thoughts soften, and your body settle into stillness as we wander together through one of nature's most beautiful stories, the story of evolution. Tonight, we're not going to treat evolution like a straight line or a ladder climbing toward perfection. Instead, we'll explore it the way it actually unfolds, like a branching tree, each limb reaching in its own direction, each twig holding its own experiments and adaptations. We'll move gently through 100 quiet facts, small windows into deep time, into the hidden traces left in bodies and bones, into the strange solutions nature has discovered again and again. Some of what you hear tonight might surprise you. Much of it will feel like whispers from the ancient past, and all of it, I hope, will accompany you softly as you ease towards sleep. Before we begin, if these gentle explorations bring you comfort or spark a quiet curiosity, consider tapping the like button and subscribing to the channel. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. And as you settle down to sleep yourself, you are very welcome to stay with this slower exploration. There is something quietly fitting about easing toward rest while contemplating the immense patience of evolutionary time. And if you feel like it, you can share where in the world you are listening from tonight. It is always grounding to know how far these quiet routines extend, how many people across how many time zones are resting beneath the same sky, carried by the same ancient processes that shaped all life on Earth. Now, let's begin. When you are just a tiny cluster of cells, barely visible to the human eye, your body began building itself according to instructions written long ago. Those instructions, encoded in your DNA, are not unique to you or even to humans. They're shared, with variations, across vast spans of the tree of life. In the very early weeks of human development, the embryo passes through stages that seem strange if you think of yourself as purely human. At one point, you had structures that looked remarkably like gill slits, the same kind that fish use to breathe underwater. You never needed gills, of course. You were developing in fluid, yes, but not in a way that required extracting oxygen from water. Those structures transformed, became parts of your jaw, your inner ear, your throat. But their presence, however brief, is a trace, a whisper of deep ancestry. This is what evolution leaves behind. Not just fossils in rock, but fossils in flesh. Every human embryo, for a short time, develops a tail. It's visible in the early weeks, a small extension at the base of the spine, complete with muscles and vertebrae. Then, as development continues, that tail is mostly reabsorbed. The bones fuse into what we call the coccyx, the tailbone, a structure that no longer extends beyond the body, but remains as a reminder of ancestors who once needed tails for balance, for grasping branches, for communication through motion. You carry that echo in your body right now, a small triangle of fused bone at the base of your spine, serving little function but holding a long memory. These embryonic traces are not mistakes. They're not flaws in the design. They're the result of evolution, working with what already exists, modifying old structures rather than building from scratch. It's easier, in evolutionary terms, to repurpose than to invent entirely new systems. So the same basic body plan, The same developmental pathways get used again and again across different species, tweaked and adjusted over millions of years. Fish embryos and human embryos look remarkably similar in their earliest stages because we share a common ancestor, a creature that lived hundreds of millions of years ago, and much of the genetic toolkit for building a body has been passed down generation after generation with edits and annotations, but never a complete rewrite. Inside your cells, there are other kinds of fossils, genetic fossils. Scattered throughout your DNA are the remnants of ancient viral infections, pieces of viral genetic code that inserted themselves into the genomes of your distant ancestors and have been passed down ever since. These are called endogenous retroviruses, and they make up a surprising amount of human DNA, several percent of the total. Most of them are inactive now, broken or silenced by mutations over time, but they're still there, like old graffiti on a wall that's been painted over but never fully erased. And here's what makes them especially interesting from an evolutionary perspective. Humans and other primates share many of the same viral insertions in the same places in their genomes. This isn't coincidence, it's evidence of shared ancestry, proof that these infections happened in a common ancestor before the lineages split. Evolution doesn't just leave traces in structure and genetics, it also leaves them in behavior, in chemistry, in the way your body responds to the world. Consider goosebumps, that strange prickling sensation you get when you're cold or frightened or moved by music. Tiny muscles at the base of each hair follicle contract, pulling the hair upright. In animals with thick fur, this response makes sense. Fluffing up the fur traps more air, providing better insulation against cold. It also makes the animal look larger, which can be useful for intimidating rivals or predators, but you don't have thick fur. Your body hair is sparse and short. Goosebumps don't keep you meaningfully warmer, and they certainly don't make you look more intimidating. Yet the reflex remains, a vestigial response inherited from furrier ancestors. Vestigial structures are everywhere once you start looking. The human appendix, a small pouch attached to the large intestine, has long been considered vestigial. For years, it was thought to be useless, a remnant of a time when our ancestors ate more plant material and needed a larger cecum to help digest cellulose. Recent research suggests the appendix may play a minor role in gut immunity, serving as a reservoir for beneficial bacteria. But even if it has some function, it's not essential. People live perfectly well without it. The appendix is an example of something that once had a larger role and has since diminished, its importance fading as diets and lifestyles changed. Another vestigial feature is the plantaris muscle, a thin muscle in the calf that's absent in about 10% of people. When it's present, it doesn't do much. Other muscles in the leg are far more important for movement. The plantaris is thought to be a leftover from ancestors who used their feet more like hands, gripping branches and manipulating objects with their toes. As human ancestors adapted to walking upright on flat ground, the need for such dexterity in the feet decreased, and the plantaris became, in evolutionary terms, optional. Even the routing of certain nerves in your body tells a story of evolutionary history. The recurrent laryngeal nerve, which controls muscles in the larynx, takes a strange path. In humans, it runs from the brain down into the chest, loops around a major blood vessel near the heart, and then travels back up to the throat. This detour is inefficient, but it makes sense in the context of evolution. In fish, the ancestors of all land vertebrates, this nerve took a direct route from the brain to the gills. As vertebrates evolved and necks became longer, the nerve got stretched, but the basic layout remained. In giraffes, this same nerve takes an absurdly long detour, running all the way down the neck, around the heart, and back up a journey of several meters when a direct route would be just a few centimeters. It's not intelligent design, it's evolutionary inheritance, the result of modifications built on top of older structures. Your body is not just your own. Right now, trillions of microorganisms live on and inside you. Bacteria, fungi, viruses, archaea. They outnumber your own cells. They live on your skin, in your mouth, in your gut, forming complex communities that have co-evolved with humans over thousands of generations. This is the microbiome, and it's not just along for the ride. These microbes help you digest food, synthesize vitamins, train your immune system, even influence your mood and behavior through chemical signals that reach your brain. You are not a single organism. You are an ecosystem, a walking, breathing collaboration between human cells and microbial partners. This relationship is an example of coevolution, a process where two or more species evolve in response to each other. The bacteria in your gut benefit from the warm, nutrient-rich environment you provide. In return, they break down complex carbohydrates that your own enzymes cannot digest, producing short-chain fatty acids that nourish the cells lining your intestines. Some gut bacteria produce vitamin K, which your body needs for blood clotting. Others help regulate your immune system, preventing it from overreacting to harmless substances or underreacting to real threats. Without these microbes, your health would suffer. Without you, they would have no home. It's a partnership forged over deep time, shaped by natural selection acting on both sides. Not all evolution is about gaining new features. Sometimes, evolution involves losing them. This is called regressive evolution, and it happens when a trait that was once useful becomes unnecessary or even costly to maintain. In environments where certain features provide no benefit, natural selection stops favoring them, and over time, they diminish or disappear entirely. One of the most striking examples of this occurs in cave-dwelling animals. Many species of fish, insects, and amphibians live in caves where light never penetrates. In total darkness, eyes are useless. Maintaining functional eyes requires energy and resources. Building the eye itself, maintaining the neural pathways that process visual information, protecting the eye from injury and infection. If eyes provide no advantage in a dark environment, individuals with reduced or non-functional eyes are not at a disadvantage. In fact, they might even have a slight advantage because they're not wasting resources on useless structures. Over many generations, eye size decreases, the lens degenerates, pigmentation fades. Eventually, cave-dwelling species may have only tiny, non-functional eye remnants buried under skin, or no eyes at all. The genes for building eyes are still there, but they've accumulated mutations that prevent normal development. The same principle applies to wings in flightless birds. Islands often host species of birds that have lost the ability to fly. With no large predators and abundant food on the ground, flight becomes less necessary. Flying is energetically expensive. It requires large flight muscles, lightweight bones, and constant maintenance. Birds that spend more time foraging on the ground and less time flying can invest those resources elsewhere, into reproduction, into growing larger, into other survival strategies. Over generations, wings shrink, flight muscles atrophy, and the birds become flightless. Ostriches, emus, kiwis, the extinct dodo, all are descendants of flying ancestors, but natural selection in their particular environments favored other traits over flight. Regressive evolution is not about moving backward or losing complexity in some overall sense. It's simply about natural selection favoring what works in a given environment. If a feature is costly and provides no benefit, it will tend to fade. If a feature is costly but essential, it will be maintained. Evolution has no foresight, no plan. It responds to immediate conditions, generation by generation, shaping organisms to fit the world they inhabit right now. While some evolutionary changes are unique to particular lineages, others happen repeatedly, independently, in different groups of organisms facing similar challenges. This is convergent evolution, and it produces some of the most striking patterns in nature. When different species evolve similar traits in response to similar environmental pressures, it suggests that certain solutions are particularly effective, so effective that natural selection discovers them again and again. One of the most famous examples is echolocation, the ability to navigate and hunt using sound. Bats do it, using high-frequency calls that bounce off objects and return as echoes, creating a sonic map of their surroundings. Dolphins and toothed whales do it too, clicking and listening in the dark ocean where vision is limited. Bats and dolphins are not closely related. Bats are mammals that evolved from terrestrial ancestors and took to the air. Dolphins are mammals that evolved from terrestrial ancestors and returned to the sea. Yet both independently evolved sophisticated echolocation systems. The physical structures differ. Bats use their larynx and specialized nose structures. Dolphins use nasal passages and a fatty melon in their forehead. But the underlying principle is the same. Both groups face the challenge of navigating in environments where vision was limited, and both arrived at the same solution: use sound. Convergent evolution also explains why unrelated animals sometimes look startlingly similar. The extinct thylacine, also called the Tasmanian tiger or Tasmanian wolf, was a marsupial more closely related to kangaroos than to any placental mammal. Yet it looked remarkably like a wolf or a large dog, with a similar body shape, similar teeth, similar hunting behavior. This similarity arose because thylacines and wolves both evolved as pursuit predators in open habitats. The body plan of a medium-sized, four-legged pursuit predator is in some sense an optimal solution to that ecological role, and natural selection shaped both thylacines and wolves toward that form. Starting from very different ancestral templates, plants offer their own examples of convergent evolution. Cacti in the Americas and euphorbia species in Africa live in similar hot, dry environments and face similar challenges: conserve water, deter herbivores, maximize photosynthesis with minimal surface area. Both groups evolved thick, fleshy stems for storing water, reduced or absent leaves to minimize water loss, and spines for protection. They look so similar that it's easy to mistake one for the other, yet they're not closely related. Cacti belong to one plant family, euphorbias to another. They converged on the same solutions because those solutions work in arid environments. Even eyes, those complex organs, have evolved independently many times. The human eye, with its lens and retina and optic nerve, is structurally different from the compound eyes of insects or the camera-like eyes of octopuses, yet all serve the same basic function: detecting light and forming images. The fact that eyes have evolved dozens of times in different lineages using different genetic and developmental pathways suggests that vision is such a useful ability that natural selection repeatedly favors it, finding ways to build light-detecting organs from whatever materials are at hand. Convergent evolution shows us that evolution is not random. Yes, mutations are random. Yes, genetic drift introduces chance into the process. But natural selection is a filter, and it's a consistent filter. Organisms that are better suited to their environments survive and reproduce more successfully. If two unrelated groups face similar challenges, natural selection will often push them toward similar solutions. The details differ, the underlying genetics differ, the developmental pathways differ, but the outcomes converge. One of the most powerful windows into evolutionary history comes from fossils, the preserved remains of ancient life. For a long time, fossils were the primary evidence for evolution, showing that life in the past was different from life today, and that forms changed over time. But some of the most fascinating fossils are those that capture transitions, moments when one major group was evolving into another. These transitional fossils show mixtures of traits, features from both ancestral and descendant groups, offering snapshots of evolution in action. Consider the transition from fish to land-dwelling vertebrates, one of the most important events in the history of life. Around 370 million years ago, some fish began venturing onto land. This wasn't a sudden leap. It was a gradual process, and we have fossils that document it. Tiktaalik, discovered in Arctic Canada, is one such fossil. It lived in shallow, swampy waters and had features of both fish and early tetrapods, the four-limbed vertebrates that would eventually give rise to amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. Tiktaalik had scales and gills like a fish, but it also had a neck, something fish don't have, and robust fins with bones that resemble the limb bones of land animals. Its skull was flat, suited for looking upward in shallow water, and it had lungs as well as gills, allowing it to breathe air. Tiktaalik couldn't walk on land the way modern tetrapods do, but it could prop itself up on its fins, perhaps moving between pools or hauling itself onto mudflats. It's a beautiful example of a creature caught between two worlds, showing how the transition from water to land unfolded gradually, feature by feature. Another remarkable transition is the return of mammals to the sea. While early tetrapods left the water for land, some of their descendants, tens of millions of years later, went back. Whales and dolphins are mammals, descended from land-dwelling ancestors with 4 legs. The fossil record documents this transition in exquisite detail. The earliest whale ancestors, like Pachycetus, lived about 50 million years ago and looked somewhat like a dog or a small deer. They had 4 legs, lived near water, and likely hunted along shorelines or in shallow rivers. Over time, their descendants became more aquatic. Ambulakitus, whose name means walking whale, was a crocodile-like creature that could move on land but spent much of its time in water, probably ambushing prey. Its legs were still functional for walking, but its body was elongated, its tail thickened, adaptations for swimming. Later forms like Durodon and Basilosaurus were fully aquatic with reduced hind limbs, streamlined bodies, and tails modified into flukes. Modern whales have completely internalized their hind limbs, tiny vestigial bones buried deep in their bodies, no longer connected to the spine, serving no function in locomotion. The fossil record shows every major step in this transition, from land to water, from legs to flippers, from a terrestrial mammal body plan to one of the most graceful swimmers in the ocean. Birds, too, have a fossil record that documents their origin. Birds are dinosaurs. Specifically, they're the living descendants of a group of small, feathered theropod dinosaurs. This might sound strange, but the evidence is overwhelming. Fossils from China, preserved in fine-grained rock, show dinosaurs with feathers, not just simple filaments, but complex asymmetrical feathers like those used in modern bird flight. Archaeopteryx, discovered in Germany in the 1860s, is perhaps the most famous transitional fossil. It lived about 150 million years ago and had a mix of bird and reptilian features. It had feathers and wings, but also teeth, a long bony tail, and claws on its wings. It could probably fly, though perhaps not as efficiently as modern birds. Later fossils show the gradual refinement of flight, the loss of the long tail, the fusion of bones, the development of a keeled breastbone for attaching powerful flight muscles. Feathers, it turns out, didn't evolve for flight initially. They likely evolved for insulation or display, colorful structures used in mating or communication. Only later were they co-opted for flight, an example of how evolution often repurposes existing structures for new functions. These transitional fossils are not missing links in some chain. Evolution is not a chain, it's a branching tree. But these fossils do fill in gaps in our understanding, showing that major transitions happened gradually, that features we associate with one group often appeared incrementally in their ancestors, and that the history of life is one of continuous change, with organisms adapting to new environments, new challenges, new opportunities. Evolution is not just about transitions and grand changes over millions of years. It's also about extreme specialization, about organisms pushed to the limits of what biology can achieve. Some adaptations are so unusual, so finely tuned to specific conditions, that they seem almost unbelievable. And yet they exist, each one a solution, crafted by natural selection to a particular problem. Take the naked mole rat, a small rodent that lives in underground colonies in East Africa. Naked mole rats have some of the strangest adaptations in the mammal world. They live in oxygen-poor burrows, and their metabolism has adjusted accordingly. They can survive much lower oxygen levels than most mammals, in part because their hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen in blood, has evolved to bind oxygen more efficiently. They also have an extremely high tolerance for carbon dioxide, which accumulates in enclosed burrows. Even more remarkable, naked mole rats seem almost immune to pain from acid and capsaicin, the chemical that makes chili peppers hot. This is because they've lost certain pain receptors in their skin. Why? In their burrows, CO2 dissolves in moisture and forms carbonic acid. Being constantly exposed to low-level acid would normally cause pain. But for naked mole rats, that pain response has been turned off. They also rarely get cancer. They live unusually long lives for their size, and they're one of only 2 known eusocial mammals, living in colonies with a queen and workers, much like bees or ants. In the freezing waters of the Antarctic, fish face a different problem: ice. Water at these latitudes can drop below the normal freezing point of fish blood. Ice crystals forming inside a fish's body would be fatal. And yet, Antarctic fish thrive. They produce antifreeze proteins, special molecules that bind to tiny ice crystals and prevent them from growing. These proteins lower the freezing point of their blood and other body fluids, allowing the fish to remain active in water cold enough to freeze most other fish solid. The genes for these antifreeze proteins evolved from genes that originally had other functions, duplicated, mutated, and repurposed by natural selection into something entirely new. Electric fish, like the electric eel, have evolved the ability to generate powerful electric shocks, enough to stun prey or deter predators. They do this using specialized cells called electrocytes, which are modified muscle cells that produce electric discharges. The electric eel can generate shocks of over 600 volts. This ability evolved independently in several fish lineages. Another example of convergent evolution. The underlying mechanism is similar, using ion channels and synchronized cell firing to create a strong electric pulse, but the genetic and developmental pathways differ across species. Some adaptations are less about extreme abilities and more about strange, almost whimsical solutions to everyday problems. Wombats, for example, produce cube-shaped feces. Yes, cube-shaped. This is highly unusual. Most animals produce round or tubular droppings, and for a long time, no one understood how or why. Recent research suggests that the shape is created by variations in the elasticity of the wombat's intestinal walls. Wombats use their feces to mark territory. stacking them on rocks or logs. Cubes don't roll away as easily as round droppings, so they stay where they're placed, making them better territorial markers. It's a bizarre solution, but it works. Penguins offer another example of evolution's pragmatism. Their ancestors could fly. Modern penguins cannot. But this is not a loss in the usual sense. Penguins are extraordinary swimmers, using their wings as flippers to propel themselves through water with grace and speed. Flight in air and flight in water require very different adaptations. Wings optimized for air are broad and lightweight. Wings optimized for water need to be stiff, dense, and powerful, more like flippers. Penguins evolved in environments where swimming was far more important than flying. Islands and coastlines where food was abundant in the ocean but not necessarily on land, and where there were few land predators. Over time, natural selection favored better swimming at the expense of flight. Penguins didn't lose flight because they became worse at it. They traded it for something more useful in their environment. This is a key point about evolution. It doesn't aim for perfection. It aims for good enough. Organisms don't need to be perfectly designed. They just need to survive and reproduce better than their competitors. Sometimes this leads to strange jury-rigged solutions, features that work but seem inefficient or awkward when viewed from an engineering perspective. The recurrent laryngeal nerve, the blind spot in the human eye, the vulnerability of the human spine to back pain, these are not signs of intelligent design. They're signs of evolutionary tinkering, of modifications built on top of older structures, constrained by history and contingency. Evolution is not just something that happened in the distant past. It's happening now, all around us, constantly. We can observe it in real time, sometimes over just a few years or decades. One of the most visible and concerning examples is antibiotic resistance in bacteria. When antibiotics were first introduced in the mid-20th century, they were miraculous. Drugs that could cure infections that had once been fatal. But bacteria evolve quickly. Their generation times are short, sometimes just minutes, and their populations are enormous. This means that mutations, though random, occur frequently, and any mutation that provides a survival advantage can spread rapidly. When bacteria are exposed to antibiotics, most are killed. But if even a tiny fraction has a mutation that makes them resistant, perhaps a change in a protein that the antibiotic targets, or a pump that expels the drug from the cell, those resistant bacteria survive. They reproduce, and their offspring inherit the resistance. Over time, resistant bacteria become more common, and the antibiotic becomes less effective. This is natural selection in action, playing out in hospitals, in soil, in the human body. We're now facing bacteria that are resistant to multiple antibiotics, some to nearly all available drugs. This is not because bacteria are trying to resist. They don't have intention or foresight. It's simply that in an environment where antibiotics are present, resistance is advantageous, and natural selection favors it. The same principle applies to other organisms. Insects evolve resistance to pesticides. Weeds evolve resistance to herbicides. Cancer cells within a single person's body can evolve resistance to chemotherapy drugs, which is one reason why cancer treatment is so difficult. In each case, the mechanism is the same. Variation exists in a population, selection pressure is applied, and individuals with traits that help them survive and reproduce become more common. Evolution doesn't stop. It's not a process that completed long ago. It's ongoing, responsive, shaping life continuously in response to changing conditions. Humans too are still evolving. This might seem surprising. We've changed our environment so much, built cities, developed medicine, created stable food supplies, that it seems like natural selection might no longer apply. But evolution continues, just perhaps in different ways and at different rates than in the past. One clear example is lactose tolerance. Most mammals, including most humans historically, lose the ability to digest lactose, the sugar in milk, after weaning. The enzyme lactase, which breaks down lactose, is no longer produced in significant amounts in adulthood. But in some human populations, particularly those with a long history of dairy farming, a genetic mutation arose that keeps lactase production active into adulthood. This mutation was advantageous in environments where milk and dairy products were a stable food source. People with the mutation could digest dairy, gaining additional nutrition, and they had more surviving offspring. Over just a few thousand years, this trait became common in certain populations, particularly in Northern Europe and parts of Africa and the Middle East. This is evolution, a genetic change spreading through a population because it provided a survival advantage in a particular environment. Another example is adaptation to high altitude. People who have lived for many generations in high altitude environments, like the Tibetan Plateau or the Andes Mountains, have evolved physiological changes that help them cope with lower oxygen levels. Tibetans, for instance, have genetic variants that affect how their bodies respond to low oxygen, allowing them to maintain better blood flow and avoid some of the negative effects of altitude, like chronic mountain sickness. These adaptations didn't arise overnight. They accumulated over thousands of years as people settled in these regions and natural selection favored individuals better suited to the conditions. Skin color is another trait that has evolved relatively recently in human history. As human ancestors moved out of Africa into regions with different levels of sunlight, skin pigmentation adapted. In areas with intense sun, darker skin, rich in melanin, protects against UV radiation, which can damage DNA and cause skin cancer. In areas with less sun, lighter skin allows more UV penetration, which is necessary for producing vitamin D. The genes controlling skin pigmentation have changed in different populations in response to local environmental conditions. A clear example of natural selection acting on human biology. Human evolution hasn't stopped. We're not immune to it. Just because we have technology and culture, those things change the environment in which natural selection operates. But selection still acts on variation. Traits that affect survival and reproduction, whether they're related to disease resistance, metabolism, or even behavior, can still become more or less common over generations. The timescales are long from a human perspective, but from an evolutionary perspective, they're perfectly normal. As you lie here now, feeling your breath move in and out, feeling the weight of your body settle into rest, consider what you are. You're a collection of adaptations, a mosaic of traits inherited from an unbroken line of ancestors stretching back billions of years. The structure of your cells, the proteins that keep you alive, the instincts that guide your behavior, all of these have been shaped by evolution, tested and refined over unimaginable spans of time. You carry traces of fish in your embryonic development, traces of tree-dwelling primates in the way your shoulder rotates, traces of ancient viral infections in your DNA. You are not separate from nature. You are nature, a temporary arrangement of matter and energy, organized by evolutionary processes that stretch back to the origin of life itself. And you're not alone in this. Every living thing on Earth, from bacteria to blue whales, shares this history. We're all connected through deep time, branches on the same tree, shaped by the same forces of mutation, selection, drift, and time. The tree of life is not a finished structure. It's still growing, still branching, still adapting to the ever-changing conditions of the planet. Extinctions prune some branches, new species emerge on others. The the story continues. With or without us, patient and relentless. Evolution teaches us that life is not fixed or static. It's dynamic, responsive, endlessly creative within the constraints of physics and chemistry. It shows us that complexity can arise from simple rules, that purpose can emerge from blind processes, that beauty and function do not require a designer, only time and variation and selection. It's a humbling perspective, one that places us firmly within the natural world rather than above it, but it's also a perspective filled with wonder. To know that you are the product of billions of years of evolutionary history, that every breath you take is enabled by molecular machines refined over eons, that you share ancestry with every other living thing. That's profound. That's connection on the deepest possible level. As you keep resting, feeling yourself sinking a little deeper with each breath, let's explore just a bit more of evolution's creativity, its capacity for solving problems in ways that seem almost ingenious, though they arise without intention or foresight, shaped only by the patient filtering of natural selection across countless generations in changing environments. Sleep itself is a kind of evolutionary adaptation, woven deeply into the biology of most animals. The amount and nature of sleep varies widely across species, from brief naps to extended periods of deep rest, but the function remains essential. Sleep allows for physical repair, for consolidation of memories, for clearing metabolic waste from the brain, for resetting neural networks. Organisms that don't sleep well don't function well. Their decision-making suffers, their health declines, their ability to survive and reproduce diminishes. And so, natural selection has favored sleep, refining it, protecting it, making it as fundamental to life as eating or breathing. As you sleep tonight, you're doing what countless generations of ancestors have done, resting, restoring, preparing for whatever comes next. It's one of the most ancient and essential things living beings do, and it connects you to the entire history of animal life. Consider the complexity of something as simple as your hand. 5 fingers, each with multiple joints, tendons connecting them to muscles in your forearm, nerves providing sensation and control, bones arranged in precise relationships that allow for gripping, grasping, manipulating objects with extraordinary precision. This hand didn't appear suddenly. It's the result of modifications to a much older structure, the fin of a fish. If you compare the bones in your hand to the bones in a fish's pectoral fin, you'll find similar elements, arranged in similar patterns. 1 bone connecting to the body, 2 bones in the forearm or equivalent segment, a cluster of smaller bones, and then the rays or digits. This is called homology, similarity due to shared ancestry. Your hand, a bat's wing, a whale's flipper, a horse's leg, all are variations on the same basic skeletal plan, modified over millions of years for different functions. Evolution works with what exists, reshaping and repurposing rather than starting from scratch. The same principle applies to other systems. Your inner ear contains 3 tiny bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes, the smallest bones in your body. They transmit vibrations from your eardrum to your inner ear, allowing you to hear. But these bones didn't start out as ear bones. In the ancestors of mammals, they were part of the jaw, bones that connected the lower jaw to the skull. In reptiles, as mammals evolved, the jaw structure changed. The bones that had been part of the jaw joint became smaller, migrated inward, and were co-opted into the hearing system. This is documented in the fossil record. Transitional forms show bones that served both functions, part of the jaw but also beginning to participate in hearing. Over time, the division of labor became complete. Jaw bones in reptiles became ear bones in mammals, a remarkable transformation visible in fossils and traceable in development. The evolutionary tree is full of these kinds of repurposings. Feathers, as mentioned earlier, likely evolved first for insulation or display and were later adapted for flight. Swim bladders in fish, gas-filled sacs that help control buoyancy, are thought to have evolved from simple lungs in early fish. Some fish used lungs to breathe air and oxygen-poor water, and over time, in some lineages, those lungs were modified into swim bladders, losing their respiratory function but gaining a new role in buoyancy control. In other lineages, lungs remained lungs and gave rise to the lungs of land vertebrates. Same structure, different trajectories, different ultimate functions. This kind of evolutionary creativity, taking something that serves one purpose and gradually modifying it to serve another, is why life is so diverse and why organisms sometimes have features that seem oddly assembled or inefficiently designed. They're not built from a clean blueprint. They're modified versions of older models, carrying historical baggage, constrained by what came before but still remarkably functional. Let's return for a moment to the idea of deep time, because it's central to understanding evolution. When we talk about millions or billions of years, it's almost impossible to grasp intuitively. Human lifespans are measured in decades. Recorded history spans a few thousand years, but evolutionary time stretches back so much further. Life on Earth is thought to have originated around 3.5 to 4 billion years ago. For most of that time, life was simple, single-celled, invisible to the naked eye. Complex multicellular life didn't appear until about 600 million years ago. Dinosaurs ruled the land for about 165 million years and went extinct 66 million years ago. Humans, in our modern form, have existed for perhaps 300,000 years, a blink in geological time. This vast timescale is why small, incremental changes can accumulate into large transformations. A tiny mutation in one generation might have almost no visible effect, but if it provides even a slight advantage, it can become more common over time. Another mutation builds on it. Another after that. Over thousands or millions of generations, these small changes add up. A fish's fin becomes sturdier, better for pushing against the bottom in shallow water. Bones within the fin become more robust. Muscles strengthen. Eventually, that fin can support weight on land, even if only briefly. More changes follow, and over millions of years, a lineage transitions from water to land. Not because any individual made a dramatic leap, but because each small step provided some advantage, some increased chance of survival and reproduction. Natural selection is patient. It has no goal, no destination. It simply favors what works in the moment, in the environment that exists right now. If conditions change, the direction of selection changes. A trait that was advantageous can become neutral or even harmful. A trait that was neutral can become important. Evolution is contingent, dependent on circumstances, on accidents of history, on which mutations happen to arise and when. If you could rewind the history of life and play it forward again, the details would almost certainly be different. Maybe intelligence would still evolve, or maybe not. Maybe flight would evolve in different groups, or maybe not. The broad patterns might be similar. Life would still adapt to available environments, fill ecological niches, diversify, but the specifics would vary. This contingency is part of why the tree of life is so interesting. There's no single best way to be a living organism. There are countless ways, each suited to particular conditions, each the result of a unique evolutionary path. A dolphin and a shark look superficially similar, both streamlined, both fast swimmers, both predators in the ocean, but they evolved from very different ancestors and use different solutions. Sharks are fish. They breathe with gills. Their skeletons are made of cartilage. Their tails move side to side. Dolphins are mammals. They breathe air with lungs. Their skeletons are bone. Their tails move up and down. They converged on a similar overall form because they face similar challenges, but the underlying biology remains distinct, shaped by different evolutionary histories. Even within a single group, diversity can be astonishing. Take beetles, the most diverse order of animals on the planet, with over 350,000 described species and likely many more yet to be discovered. Beetles occupy nearly every terrestrial and freshwater habitat. Some are predators, some eat plants, some scavenge dead material, some live in dung, some bore through wood, some are aquatic, some are parasitic. They range in size from a fraction of a millimeter to several inches. They've evolved bioluminescence, chemical defenses, mimicry, camouflage, symbiotic relationships with fungi and bacteria, parental care, complex mating rituals. All of this diversity arose from a common ancestor through the same basic processes: mutation, selection, drift, time. Beetles radiated into available niches, adapting and specializing, each lineage finding its own way to survive and reproduce. Adaptation is the word we use to describe features that enhance survival and reproduction in a particular environment. But not every trait is an adaptation. Some are byproducts, side effects of other changes. Some are neutral, neither helpful nor harmful. And some are remnants, features that were once adaptive but no longer serve their original function. Distinguishing between these can be tricky, and it requires careful study. Just because a feature exists doesn't mean it's adaptive. Evolution isn't perfect. It's a process constrained by history, by genetics, by development. It produces organisms that are good enough to survive, not ideal machines. Consider the human spine. It's prone to problems: back pain, herniated discs, structural issues that cause discomfort and disability. Why? Because the human spine is a modified version of a structure that evolved for horizontal, four-legged locomotion. Our ancestors walked on all fours, and the spine was arranged to support the weight of the body from below, like a bridge. When human ancestors began walking upright, the spine had to adapt to a new role, supporting the body vertically. This required changes in curvature, in the size and shape of vertebrae, in the way weight is distributed. But the spine couldn't be completely redesigned. Evolution worked with what existed, bending and tweaking an old structure to fit a new function. The result works. Humans can walk upright, but it's not perfect. The spine is prone to stress and injury because it wasn't originally designed for this purpose. It's a compromise, a solution good enough to allow upright walking, but carrying the marks of its evolutionary history. The same is true for childbirth in humans. Giving birth is difficult and dangerous for humans compared to most other mammals. This is partly because of the size of the human head. Large brains are metabolically expensive and require large skulls. But walking upright also required changes in the pelvis, narrowing it to support bipedal locomotion. The result is a tight fit. A baby's head is barely able to pass through the birth canal, and the process is long, painful, and risky. This is not good design. It's the result of evolutionary trade-offs, competing demands that couldn't all be optimized at once. Evolution doesn't plan ahead. It can't anticipate future problems. It responds to immediate pressures, and sometimes the solutions it finds create new problems down the line. Yet despite these imperfections, life persists. It adapts. It diversifies. It fills every available niche. Even in the harshest environments, life finds a way. In deep-sea hydrothermal vents, where water temperatures can exceed boiling and toxic chemicals pour out of the Earth's crust, entire ecosystems thrive. The base of the food web isn't photosynthetic organisms, it's bacteria that perform chemosynthesis, extracting energy from chemical reactions involving sulfur and other minerals. These bacteria support communities of tube worms, clams, crabs, and fish, all living in total darkness under crushing pressure in water that would be lethal to most surface life. Yet to them, it's home. They've adapted, evolved enzymes and proteins that function at high temperatures, metabolic pathways that don't require oxygen, symbiotic relationships that allow them to harness chemical energy. Life, it turns out, is not constrained to a narrow range of conditions. Given enough time, it can adapt to almost anything. In the frozen deserts of Antarctica, microbes live in the soil, in ice, even inside rocks. They grow slowly, reproducing perhaps once a year or even less often, but they survive. They produce antifreeze compounds, protect their DNA from radiation damage, enter dormant states during the harshest conditions, and resume activity when conditions improve. In the driest deserts, in the saltiest lakes, in acidic hot springs, in the deep subsurface of the Earth's crust, kilometers below ground, life persists. Each of these extreme environments selects for different traits, and over time, organisms evolve to not just tolerate, but thrive in conditions that would kill most other life. This resilience, this ability to adapt, is one of the most remarkable features of life. It's not because life is trying to survive or because it has a goal. It's simply because variation exists and natural selection filters that variation. In any population, some individuals are slightly better suited to the environment than others. Those individuals survive and reproduce more successfully. Their traits become more common. Repeat this process over countless generations, and you get adaptation, populations that are finely tuned to their environments, not through foresight or planning, but through the blind, patient action of selection. Now, as you feel yourself sinking deeper into rest, as the edges of waking thought blur and soften, let's turn one more time to the human story, to our place in this vast evolutionary tapestry. Humans are not the pinnacle of evolution. Evolution has no pinnacle. We're simply one branch among millions with our own unique adaptations and our own evolutionary history. But that history is fascinating, and understanding it helps us understand ourselves. Human ancestors split from the lineage that led to chimpanzees and bonobos somewhere around 6 to 7 million years ago. The fossil record of human evolution is fragmentary. We don't have complete skeletons for most species, but we have enough to piece together the broad outlines. Early human ancestors, species like Sahelanthropus and Ardipithecus, lived in Africa and show a mix of ape-like and human-like traits. They likely walked upright at least some of the time, but they also spent time in trees. Over time, human ancestors became more committed to bipedalism. Walking on two legs became their primary mode of locomotion. This freed the hands for carrying objects, for making tools, for manipulating the environment in new ways. Tool use isn't unique to humans. Many animals use tools. Crows use sticks to extract insects. Sea otters use rocks to crack open shells. Chimpanzees use stones to crack nuts and sticks to fish for termites. But humans took tool use to a new level. Around 2.6 million years ago, stone tools appear in the archaeological record. Simple flakes struck from rocks, sharp enough to cut meat or scrape hides. Over time, tools became more complex, more specialized, more carefully crafted. This required not just manual dexterity, but also planning, foresight, the ability to imagine a tool that doesn't yet exist and then create it. Brain size increased over the course of human evolution. Early human ancestors had brains similar in size to those of modern chimpanzees, around 400 to 500 cc's. By the time Homo erectus appeared, about 2 million years ago, brain size had increased to around 900 cc's. Modern humans have brains averaging around 1,300 to 1,400 cc's. Larger brains are metabolically expensive, requiring more energy, more nutrients, and they make childbirth more difficult. As mentioned earlier, the advantages must have outweighed the costs. Larger brains allowed for more complex thought, better problem solving, language, culture, the ability to cooperate in large groups, to plan for the future, to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. Language is one of the defining features of modern humans. All human societies have language, complex systems of sounds or signs that convey meaning. Language allows for abstract thought, for discussing things that aren't immediately present, for sharing ideas and coordinating actions. The evolutionary origin of language is debated. We don't know exactly when or how it arose, because language doesn't fossilize. But anatomical features, like the shape of the skull and the position of the larynx, and genetic evidence, like mutations in genes involved in speech, suggest that the capacity for language evolved gradually, perhaps reaching its modern form sometime in the last few 100,000 years. Culture, the transmission of knowledge and behavior through learning rather than genetics, is another key feature of humanity. Humans learn from each other. We teach, we imitate, we build on what previous generations discovered. This allows for cumulative cultural evolution, where knowledge and technology can increase over time, even within a single lifetime. A child today learns in years what took humanity thousands of years to discover. This is not biological evolution, it's cultural evolution, but it's shaped by the same brain and cognitive capacities that biological evolution produced. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa sometime around 300,000 years ago, though pinning down an exact date is difficult because the transition from earlier species was gradual. For most of human history, Homo sapiens lived as hunter-gatherers in small, mobile groups subsisting on wild plants and animals. Around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, some groups began to domesticate plants and animals, transitioning to agriculture. This was a major shift, one that led to larger, more settled populations, the rise of cities and states, and eventually, the complex, interconnected world we live in today. Agriculture changed the environment in which human natural selection operated. New diseases emerged, spread by dense populations and contact with domesticated animals. Diets changed, favoring those who could digest new foods or tolerate new toxins. Life expectancy, nutrition, and reproductive patterns all shifted. And through it all, natural selection continued, shaping human biology in subtle but measurable ways. Humans are still evolving. The process hasn't stopped just because we have technology or medicine. Traits related to disease resistance are under selection. Individuals with genetic variants that protect against malaria, for instance, are more likely to survive and reproduce in regions where malaria is common. The sickle cell trait is a famous example. A genetic mutation that in one copy provides resistance to malaria, but in 2 copies causes sickle cell disease. In regions without malaria, the sickle cell allele is rare. In regions with malaria, it's relatively common, maintained by natural selection because the benefits of malaria resistance outweigh the costs. Metabolic traits are also evolving. Populations with access to high-calorie diets may experience selection on genes related to metabolism, fat storage, and insulin regulation. Even traits like height and reproductive timing can be influenced by natural selection, if they affect survival or the number of offspring. But human evolution in the modern era is complicated. Medicine allows people to survive who might not have in the past, reducing some selection pressures. Global migration mixes populations that were previously isolated, introducing new genetic variation. Culture changes faster than biology, so human behavior and environment can shift dramatically within a few generations, faster than natural selection can respond. This doesn't mean evolution has stopped. It means the landscape of selection has changed, and predicting the direction of future human evolution is difficult. As you rest here now, feeling your body grow heavier, feeling your thoughts soften and scatter, consider that you are a point in evolutionary time. You're not an endpoint. You're not a finished product. You're part of an ongoing process, connected backward to all your ancestors and forward to all your potential descendants. The traits you carry, physical, behavioral, genetic, are a mix of what worked for your ancestors in their environments. Some of those traits still serve you well. Others may be neutral or even slightly detrimental in the modern world. But all of them are part of your story, part of the long branching path that led from the first living cells to you here, now, breathing slowly, drifting towards sleep. And in a sense, you're not just an individual, you're a community. Your body hosts trillions of microbes, as mentioned earlier, but also mitochondria, the energy-producing organelles in your cells. Mitochondria were once free-living bacteria that were engulfed by ancestral eukaryotic cells over 1 billion years ago. Instead of being digested, they formed a symbiotic relationship, providing energy in exchange for protection and nutrients. Over time, they became so integrated that they can no longer survive independently. They have their own DNA separate from the DNA in your cell nucleus, and they reproduce on their own schedule. Every cell in your body, except red blood cells, contains hundreds or thousands of mitochondria, all descendants of those ancient bacteria. You are, quite literally, a fusion of different lineages, a walking example of symbiotic evolution. This kind of deep integration is not unique. Chloroplasts, the organelles in plant cells that perform photosynthesis, also originated as free-living bacteria, cyanobacteria, that were engulfed and became partners. Many insects carry symbiotic bacteria that provide essential nutrients not available in their diets. Corals depend on photosynthetic algae living in their tissues. Lichens are composite organisms. Fungi and algae or cyanobacteria living so intimately together that they function as a single unit. Life is not just individual organisms competing. It's also cooperation, partnership, interdependence. Evolution favors whatever works, and sometimes what works is collaboration. There's a concept in evolutionary biology called the Red Queen hypothesis, named after a character in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, who says, "It takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place." The idea is that in some interactions, particularly between predators and prey, or parasites and hosts, both sides are constantly evolving in response to each other. Prey evolve better defenses, so predators evolve better offense, which drives prey to evolve even better defenses, and so on. Neither side can afford to stop evolving, because the other side isn't stopping either. The result is that species are constantly adapting just to maintain their relative fitness, even if they're not expanding their range or increasing their population. It's an evolutionary arms race, and it can drive rapid change, elaborate adaptations, and sometimes very strange solutions. Mimicry is one result of these kinds of interactions. Some harmless species evolve to look like dangerous or distasteful ones, gaining protection from predators who've learned to avoid the dangerous model. This is called Bayesian mimicry. A harmless fly that looks like a stinging bee is less likely to be eaten because predators avoid anything that looks like a bee. Other species that are both distasteful or dangerous may evolve to look like each other, sharing the cost of teaching predators to avoid them. This is Mullerian mimicry. Some predators evolve to mimic harmless or even attractive things. Anglerfish have a lure that looks like a small prey item, drawing other fish close enough to be ambushed. Some orchids mimic female insects, luring males who attempt to mate with the flower and inadvertently pollinate it in the process. These are not conscious deceptions. They're the result of natural selection favoring individuals whose appearance or behavior happens to provide an advantage. As your mind drifts further now, as the details begin to blur and merge, as the stories and examples fade into a gentle background hum, let's come back to the core idea. Evolution is change over time in populations of organisms, driven by natural processes that are understandable, testable, and observable. It's not a belief system. It's a scientific framework supported by overwhelming evidence from genetics, paleontology, anatomy, development, biogeography, and direct observation. It explains why life is the way it is, why organisms are adapted to their environments, why they share similarities with some species and not others, why the history of life shows patterns of branching and diversification. Understanding evolution doesn't diminish the wonder of life. If anything, it deepens it. To know that you share ancestry with every living thing, that the same genetic code operates in bacteria, trees, and humans, that the mechanisms building a fly's eye and a human eye are related despite the differences in structure, this is profound. To know that the complexity and diversity of life arose not through supernatural intervention, but through natural processes playing out over deep time. This makes life more remarkable, not less. It means that the universe, following its own laws, is capable of producing consciousness, beauty, meaning, without needing external guidance. Consider camouflage, one of nature's most widespread adaptations. Prey animals that blend into their surroundings are less likely to be spotted by predators. Predators that blend in are more likely to ambush prey successfully. And so, natural selection favors coloration and patterns that provide concealment. Some forms of camouflage are simple: a brown moth on brown bark, a green katydid on a green leaf. But others are extraordinarily sophisticated. Stick insects look like twigs, complete with fake buds and leaf scars. Leaf insects look like leaves, with veins, irregular edges, even spots that mimic fungal damage. Some caterpillars look like bird droppings, an unappealing disguise that keeps them safe from predators. Cuttlefish and octopuses can change their color and texture in seconds, matching not just the hue, but also the pattern and three-dimensional structure of their surroundings. They do this using specialized skin cells called chromatophores, iridophores, and leucophores, along with muscles that can make their skin smooth or bumpy. It's an incredibly complex system, and it evolved because survival depended on not being seen. Some animals take camouflage a step further with disruptive coloration, patterns that break up the outline of the body, making it harder for predators or prey to recognize the animal's shape. Zebras with their bold black and white stripes might seem highly visible, but when they move in a herd, the overlapping patterns make it difficult for a predator to single out one individual. Some fish have dark stripes through their eyes, disguising one of the most recognizable features of an animal. Countershading, where an animal is darker on top and lighter underneath, is another common form of camouflage. It counteracts the effects of sunlight coming from above, making the animal appear flat and less three-dimensional. Harder to spot against varied backgrounds, predators have evolved their own strategies to overcome camouflage. Some hunt by sound or smell rather than vision. Others have evolved enhanced visual systems that can detect subtle movements or see in wavelengths their prey can't. It's another example of the evolutionary arms race. Constant pressure and counter-pressure, adaptation and counter-adaptation. Sexual selection is another powerful force in evolution, distinct from but related to natural selection. While natural selection favors traits that enhance survival, sexual selection favors traits that enhance mating success. Sometimes these overlap, but sometimes they conflict. A male peacock's elaborate tail is a burden. It's heavy, it's conspicuous, it makes flying difficult, and it attracts predators. From a survival standpoint, it's a handicap. But from a mating standpoint, it's an asset. Peahens prefer males with large, colorful, symmetrical tails. Males with better tails get more opportunities to mate, and they pass on the genes for elaborate tails to their offspring. Over time, sexual selection drives the evolution of increasingly extravagant displays. Why do peahens prefer elaborate tails? One theory is that the tail is an honest signal of the male's genetic quality. Only a healthy, well-nourished, parasite-free male can grow and maintain such a large, bright tail. By choosing males with impressive tails, females are choosing males with good genes, genes that will benefit their offspring. This is called the handicap principle. The idea that extravagant traits are reliable signals precisely because they're costly. A male in poor condition can't fake a magnificent tail. Sexual selection has driven the evolution of a staggering variety of traits. Antlers in deer, elaborate horns in beetles, bright plumage in birds, complex songs, elaborate dances, pheromones, bioluminescent displays, fighting behavior, gift-giving, nest-building. In some species, males compete directly with each other for access to females, leading to the evolution of large size, weapons, and aggressive behavior. In others, females choose mates based on displays, leading to the evolution of beauty, complexity, and novelty. The results are some of the most spectacular and bizarre features in the natural world. Sexual selection also operates on females, though often less obviously. In some species, females compete for males. In others, females have evolved traits that signal their fertility or quality to males. The dynamics vary depending on the mating system, the parental investment patterns, the ecology of the species, but the underlying principle is the same. Traits that increase reproductive success become more common over time, even if they reduce survival. Another concept worth considering is kin selection, the idea that natural selection can favor behaviors that benefit relatives, even at a cost to the individual. This is because relatives share. If you help your sibling survive and reproduce, you're helping copies of your own genes, even if you don't reproduce yourself. This can explain altruistic behavior that benefits others at a cost to the actor. Worker bees, for example, don't reproduce. They spend their lives helping their mother, the queen, reproduce. This seems counterintuitive from a natural selection standpoint. Why would individuals sacrifice their own reproduction? But bees have an unusual genetic system that makes sisters more closely related to each other than they would be to their own offspring. By helping the queen produce more sisters, workers are actually propagating their genes more effectively than if they reproduce themselves. Kin selection explains this. It's not about individuals. It's about genes, and genes can spread by helping relatives as well as by direct reproduction. Kin selection also helps explain parental care, alarm calls, food sharing, and other cooperative behaviors seen across the animal kingdom. Organisms that help close relatives increase the survival of shared genes, and over time, genes that promote such helping behavior can spread through populations. Let's return once more to fossils. because they offer such a clear window into evolutionary history. The fossil record is incomplete. Fossilization is a rare event, requiring specific conditions, and many organisms don't fossilize well. But what we have is more than enough to show that life has changed dramatically over time. The oldest fossils are simple stromatolites, layered structures built by communities of microbes. Single-celled organisms dominated for billions of years. Then, around 600 million years ago, complex multicellular life appeared. First, soft-bodied forms like jellyfish and worms, then animals with hard shells and skeletons. The Cambrian explosion, a period around 540 million years ago, saw a rapid diversification of animal forms, the origin of most major body plans we see today. Fish evolved, then amphibians, then reptiles, then mammals and birds. Each group arose from earlier forms, and the transitions are documented in fossils. The sequence of fossils in the rock layers matches what we'd expect from evolutionary theory. Simpler forms appear in older rocks. More complex, more derived forms appear in younger rocks. We don't find rabbits in Precambrian rocks. We don't find humans alongside trilobites. The order is consistent, and it tells a story of gradual change, of lineages branching and diversifying, of extinctions and radiations. Some fossils capture moments of extraordinary preservation. The Burgess Shale in Canada contains fossils from the Cambrian period, over 500 million years old, preserved in such detail that soft tissues, eyes, guts, even muscles are visible. These fossils show bizarre forms, some unlike anything alive today, experiments in body plans that didn't persist. They also show recognizable forms, early arthropods, early chordates, ancestors of lineages that would eventually lead to modern groups. Another famous site is the Liaoning province in China, where volcanic ash buried and preserved dinosaurs, early birds, and early mammals in exquisite detail. Feathers, fur, skin, even stomach contents are preserved. These fossils have revolutionized our understanding of dinosaur biology, showing that many dinosaurs were feathered, that feathers evolved long before flight, that birds are not just related to dinosaurs but are dinosaurs, members of a lineage that survived the mass extinction 66 million years ago. Amber, fossilized tree resin, preserves small organisms in 3 dimensions. Insects, spiders, even small vertebrates have been found trapped in amber, their bodies intact, their colors sometimes preserved. These fossils provide snapshots of ancient ecosystems, showing what species coexisted, what they looked like, even behaviors like mating or predation frozen in time. Ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland preserve ancient air, bubbles of atmosphere trapped as snow compacted into ice. By analyzing these bubbles, scientists can reconstruct past atmospheric compositions, temperatures, and climate patterns going back hundreds of thousands of years. This data has shown that Earth's climate has changed dramatically over time, with ice ages and warm periods alternating, driven by shifts in Earth's orbit and other factors. These climate changes affected evolution, driving extinctions, opening new habitats, favoring certain traits over others. The field of molecular evolution allows scientists to study evolution at the level of DNA and proteins. By comparing genetic sequences across species, we can reconstruct evolutionary relationships, determine when lineages split, identify which genes are under selection, and track how genetic variation spreads through populations. The molecular evidence for evolution is overwhelming. All life uses the same genetic code. The same genes appear in vastly different organisms, modified but recognizable. The patterns of similarity and difference match what we'd expect from a branching tree of descent. One of the most powerful pieces of molecular evidence comes from pseudogenes, genes that have been inactivated by mutations. Humans and other primates have a pseudogene for making vitamin C. Most mammals can synthesize vitamin C, but primates, guinea pigs, and some bats and birds cannot. We have the gene, but it's broken, disabled by a mutation. This makes sense in an evolutionary context. Our ancestors ate fruit rich in vitamin C, so the ability to make it was no longer essential. Individuals with broken vitamin C genes weren't at a disadvantage, and those mutations persisted. Different species have the same break in the same gene, indicating shared ancestry. It's hard to explain this pattern except through evolution. Endogenous retroviruses mentioned earlier provide similar evidence. These are viral sequences inserted into the genome. The fact that humans and chimpanzees share many of the same insertions in the same places is strong evidence of common ancestry. If humans and chimpanzees were created separately, there's no reason they'd have the same viral insertions. But if they share a common ancestor who was infected, and that infection was passed down, then both lineages would inherit it. The pattern fits evolution perfectly. There's a phenomenon called coevolution, where two or more species evolve in response to each other. Their fates intertwined across generations. We touched on this earlier with gut bacteria, but coevolution extends far beyond that. Flowers and their pollinators are a classic example. Many flowers have evolved specific shapes, colors, and scents that attract particular pollinators: bees, butterflies, moths, birds, bats. In return, those pollinators have evolved traits that allow them to efficiently extract nectar or pollen: long tongues, specialized beaks, good color vision, the ability to hover in place. Some relationships are so specific that one species depends entirely on the other. Certain orchids can only be pollinated by certain species of bees or moths, and those pollinators may rely heavily on those orchids for food. If one goes extinct, the other may follow. This tight coupling is the result of millions of years of mutual evolutionary influence, each species shaping the other. Predator-prey relationships show coevolution too. Cheetahs are extraordinarily fast, capable of reaching speeds over 100 kilometers per hour in short bursts. Gazelles, their primary prey, are also fast and agile, with keen senses and quick reflexes. Each side is under pressure to outperform the other. Cheetahs that are faster and better at predicting gazelle movements catch more food and survive better. Gazelles that are faster and better at evading cheetahs survive longer and reproduce more. The result is an ongoing evolutionary race neither side can rest, because the other side is always adapting. Parasites and hosts co-evolve in particularly intricate ways. Parasites evolve to exploit hosts more effectively, finding ways to enter the body, evade the immune system, reproduce, and spread to new hosts. Hosts evolve defenses, stronger immune responses, behavioral changes that reduce exposure to parasites, even genetic variants that make them less susceptible. Some parasites manipulate host behavior to enhance their own transmission. The parasitic worm Toxoplasma gondii, for example, infects rodents and appears to reduce their fear of cats, since the parasite can only complete its life cycle in a cat's digestive system. Making rodents more likely to be caught and eaten by cats benefits the parasite, even if it harms the rodent. Natural selection favors parasites that can manipulate hosts in this way, creating bizarre and sometimes disturbing examples of evolutionary adaptation. The concept of evolutionary medicine applies evolutionary thinking to human health and disease. Many medical conditions make more sense when viewed through an evolutionary lens. Why do we get fevers? Because slightly elevated body temperature helps the immune system fight infections and can inhibit the growth of pathogens. Fever is not a malfunction, it's an adaptation. Why do we feel pain? Because pain is a signal that something is wrong. prompting us to protect injured areas and avoid further harm. Why do we crave sugar and fat? Because in the environment where humans evolved, these high-energy foods were rare and valuable, and individuals who sought them out had better nutrition and survival. In the modern world, where sugar and fat are abundant, those same cravings can lead to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. But the underlying mechanisms are adaptations to a very different environment. Some diseases persist because they're the result of evolutionary trade-offs. Sickle cell disease, mentioned earlier, is maintained in populations exposed to malaria because the heterozygous condition provides protection. The gene variant causes disease in some individuals but saves others, and natural selection balances the costs and benefits. Morning sickness during pregnancy, though unpleasant, may protect the developing fetus from toxins and pathogens in food, reducing the risk of miscarriage or birth defects. It's not a disorder, it's a protective mechanism, even though it feels like a malfunction to the person experiencing it. Aging itself can be understood through an evolutionary lens. Why do we age and die? Because natural selection is strongest early in life, when organisms are reproducing. Mutations that cause problems late in life, after most reproduction has occurred, are under weaker selection. They can accumulate, leading to the gradual deterioration we call aging. Some genes even have beneficial effects early in life, but harmful effects later, a phenomenon called antagonistic pleiotropy. Natural selection favors these genes because the early benefits outweigh the late costs, which accrue after reproduction has largely finished. Aging is not programmed or inevitable in some cosmic sense. It's the result of how natural selection operates over a lifetime. Evo-Devo, the field of evolutionary developmental biology, explores how changes in developmental processes lead to evolutionary change. Small changes in the timing, location, or intensity of gene expression during development can have large effects on the adult organism. This helps explain how evolution can produce dramatic changes relatively quickly. You don't need to reinvent the entire body plan. You just need to tweak when or where certain genes turn on or off. The same genes, with minor modifications in their regulation, can produce very different outcomes. Hox genes are a famous example. These are genes that control the overall body plan during development, determining where heads, limbs, segments, and other structures form. Hox genes are remarkably conserved across animals, meaning they're similar in structure and function from insects to mammals. Changes in Hox gene expression can lead to major anatomical changes. A mutation that causes a Hox gene to be expressed in a different segment can result in legs growing where antennae should be, or extra wings, or other dramatic transformations. Most such mutations are harmful, producing non-functional organisms, but occasionally they can lead to viable new forms. This is how evolution can explore new body plans without starting from scratch. Heterochrony, changes in the timing of developmental events, is another mechanism. If sexual maturity is reached while the organism still has juvenile features, a process called neoteny, the adult form can look very different from ancestral forms. Humans show some neotenic features compared to other primates: flat faces, large heads relative to body size, less body hair. Whether this played a role in human evolution is debated, but it's an example of how shifting developmental timing can produce evolutionary novelty. Developmental constraints also shape evolution. Not every conceivable form is possible. Development is a complex process, and changes that disrupt it too severely are lethal. This means that evolution tends to work with existing developmental pathways, modifying them incrementally rather than tearing them down and starting over. This constrains the paths evolution can take, channeling it in certain directions. It's why we see repeated patterns, why vertebrates all have 4 limbs, or modified versions of 4 limbs. why arthropods have segmented bodies, why certain structures appear again and again across different lineages. Island biogeography offers another window into evolution. Islands are natural laboratories. They're isolated, which limits the number of species that can reach them, and they're often ecologically simple, with fewer competitors and predators than mainland environments. This can lead to rapid evolutionary change. Species that colonize islands often evolve to fill niches that are occupied by different species on the mainland. This is called adaptive radiation, the rapid diversification of a single lineage into multiple species adapted to different ecological roles. The Galapagos finches, studied by Darwin, are a classic example. A single ancestral finch species arrived on the islands, and over time diversified into more than a dozen species with different beak shapes and sizes, each adapted to a different food source: seeds, insects, cactus flowers, even blood from other birds. The Hawaiian honeycreepers show a similar pattern, a single colonizing species giving rise to many species with varied diets and appearances. Madagascar's lemurs, an island's massive collection of endemic species found nowhere else, also represent adaptive radiation. Islands also tend to produce unusual forms. Gigantism and dwarfism are common. In the absence of mainland predators, some species grow larger. Without competition from large herbivores or predators, some species shrink. Flightlessness is common in island birds, as discussed earlier. The absence of land mammals on many islands allows birds to occupy ecological roles usually filled by mammals, leading to the evolution of ground-dwelling, sometimes large, sometimes flightless birds. Isolation doesn't just happen on physical islands. Mountain ranges, deserts, rivers, and even habitat fragments in human-altered landscapes can act as ecological islands, isolating populations and allowing divergent evolution. Over time, isolated populations may become so different from each other that they can no longer interbreed if brought back into contact. This is how new species form, through isolation and divergent evolution. Speciation, the process by which new species arise, is a gradual process. Most of the time, there's no clear moment when one species becomes two. Instead, populations diverge slowly, accumulating differences in genetics, behavior, morphology, until eventually they're distinct enough to be considered separate species. The definition of species is somewhat fuzzy, which makes sense given that evolution is a continuous process. Biologists often use reproductive isolation as a criterion. If two populations can no longer interbreed and produce fertile offspring, they're considered separate species. But even this has exceptions and complications. Some species are cryptic, looking nearly identical but genetically distinct and reproductively isolated. Others are morphologically diverse, but still able to interbreed, as with dogs, which range from tiny chihuahuas to massive Great Danes, but are all the same species. The boundaries between species are real but not always sharp, a reflection of evolution's gradual nature. Hybridization, the breeding between different species, can sometimes produce viable offspring. Mules, the offspring of horses and donkeys, are healthy but usually sterile. Some hybrids are fertile, and in rare cases, hybridization can even lead to the formation of new species. This is more common in plants than animals. Hybrid speciation adds another layer of complexity to the tree of life, with branches not just splitting but occasionally merging or exchanging genetic material. Horizontal gene transfer, common in bacteria, is another way genes can move between lineages. Bacteria can pick up DNA from their environment or receive it from other bacteria through various mechanisms. This allows them to acquire new traits quickly, including antibiotic resistance. It complicates the tree of life at the microbial level, where branches don't just split, but also reconnect, forming more of a web than a tree. For multicellular organisms, Horizontal gene transfer is rarer but not unknown. Some animals have acquired genes from bacteria. Some plants have acquired genes from fungi or other plants. The history of life is messier than a simple branching tree suggests, with gene flow, hybridization, and horizontal transfer adding complexity. As you feel yourself sinking even deeper now, as the boundaries between waking and sleeping blur completely, as your thoughts become less like thoughts and more like soft, drifting images, consider that evolution is not a neat, linear story. It's messy, contingent, full of dead ends and unlikely successes. It's shaped by accidents, catastrophes, lucky breaks. Asteroid impacts have driven mass extinctions, wiping out dominant lineages and allowing others to flourish. Climate shifts have opened new habitats and closed off old ones. Volcanic eruptions, ice ages, continental drift, all have influenced the course of evolution, creating opportunities and challenges that shaped which lineages survived and how they adapted. If you could rewind the tape of life and play it forward again, the details would differ. Maybe mammals never become dominant. Maybe dinosaurs never go extinct. Maybe intelligence evolves in a completely different lineage, or never evolves at all. The outcomes are not predetermined. They emerge from the interaction of random variation, selection, drift, and historical contingency. This doesn't make life meaningless. If anything, it makes it more precious. We're here not because it was inevitable, but because of an extraordinarily long and improbable chain of events, each one building on the last, each one shaped by the conditions and constraints of its time. And you, lying here now, are the product of that chain. Every one of your ancestors, stretching back billions of years, survived long enough to reproduce. Not all did. The vast majority of organisms that ever lived left no descendants. But your lineage is unbroken. You carry the legacy of survivors, of organisms that adapted, that persevered, that found ways to thrive in changing environments. That's remarkable. That's worth honoring, even as you let it fade into the quiet background of sleep. Evolution is not just about the past. It's ongoing. Right now, populations are evolving in response to their environments. Climate change is shifting the ranges and traits of countless species. Urban environments are selecting for different behaviors and physiologies in birds, insects, and mammals. Pollution is driving resistance and adaptation in fish, plants, and microbes. The Anthropocene, the current geological epoch defined by human impact on the planet, is a new environmental context, and evolution is responding. Some of these changes are fast, visible within decades. Others are slow, subtle, detectable only through careful study. But evolution continues, as it has for billions of years, shaping life in response to the conditions that exist, preparing no grand future, following no plan, simply filtering variation through the sieve of survival and reproduction. There's one more truth worth carrying into sleep, a truth about variation itself, the raw material of evolution. No two individuals are exactly alike. Even identical twins who share the same DNA differ in subtle ways due to environmental effects, different experiences, different cellular histories. This variation is essential. Without it, there could be no adaptation, no evolution, no response to changing conditions. Populations that lack genetic diversity are vulnerable, unable to adapt when environments shift or new challenges arise. Variation is not imperfection. It's the foundation of resilience, the source of possibility. You, in all your uniqueness, are part of that variation. The particular combination of genes you carry has never existed before and will never exist again. You are an experiment, a single iteration in the ongoing exploration of what it means to be human, to be alive, to exist in this particular moment of deep time. And, like all experiments, your value is not in being perfect or optimal, but in being real, in contributing your unique variation to the broader population, to the gene pool that future generations will draw from. This is true for every organism. Every beetle, every bacterium, every blade of grass is a unique combination of genetic information, expressed in a unique environmental context. Diversity is not just variety for its own sake. It's insurance, redundancy, the best strategy life has found for persisting through an unpredictable and changing world. As you continue resting, breathing softly, let's explore one more layer of evolutionary complexity, one that feels almost poetic in its randomness. Not all evolutionary change is driven by natural selection. There's another force at work, quieter, more random, but equally important in shaping the genetic makeup of populations. It's called genetic drift, and it operates through pure chance, like leaves falling from a tree, landing wherever the wind takes them. Picture a small group of butterflies living on an island, some with slightly darker wings, others slightly lighter. Then imagine a storm sweeps through one afternoon, powerful and sudden. When it passes, half the butterflies are gone, scattered or lost. The survivors might, purely by luck, be mostly the darker ones or mostly the lighter ones. Not because one color was better, safer, or stronger, but simply because of where each butterfly happened to be when the wind struck. The next generation will reflect this accident of fate not through any logic of adaptation, but through the roll of evolutionary dice. This is genetic drift, and it shapes populations in ways that have nothing to do with fitness or survival advantage. It's evolution by lottery, by happenstance, by the simple mathematics of small numbers and random sampling. In small populations, chance looms larger than you might expect. A beneficial gene can vanish, a neutral or even slightly harmful one can. The future is written partly by selection, yes, but also partly by luck. Sometimes, when a small group breaks away from a larger population and settles somewhere new, they carry only a sliver of the genetic diversity their ancestors possessed. Whatever genes happen to be in those few founding individuals, by pure accident, become the genetic foundation of an entire new population. This is called a founder effect, and it can create populations that look quite different from their origins, not through adaptation to new conditions, but simply through the randomness of who made the journey. Other times, a population crashes, struck by disease or famine or some other catastrophe, and then slowly rebuilds from the handful who survived. This bottleneck leaves its mark in the genes, a narrowing of diversity that reflects not which traits were best, but which individuals happen by chance to make it through. Cheetahs carry this signature in their blood. Every cheetah alive is genetically remarkably similar to every other, as if they all descended from a very small group of ancestors, survivors of some ancient near extinction that left the species forever marked by that narrow passage through time. This dance between selection and drift, between adaptation and accident, between purpose and randomness, adds another layer of beauty to the evolutionary story. Not every feature tells a tale of survival. Not every change carries meaning. Sometimes things simply happen because they can, because in the right circumstances, chance writes chapters in the book of life. There's yet another mechanism that adds even more subtlety, one that operates not by rewriting the text of DNA, but by changing which passages get read aloud and which stays silent. Imagine your genome as a vast library filled with instructions. Epigenetics is like a system of bookmarks and annotations, little chemical tags that mark certain genes as read this now or skip this section. without changing a single word of the underlying code. These markers can shift in response to the world around you. What you eat, the stress you carry, the air you breathe, even the relationships you form. All of these can leave small chemical signatures on your DNA, altering which genes are active and which lie dormant. And sometimes, in ways scientists are still working to fully understand, these marks can be passed down to your children and even to their children, allowing experiences from one generation to whisper quietly into the biology of the next. Studies have found that hardship experienced by pregnant mothers, periods of hunger or fear or upheaval, can leave traces not only in their offspring, but in the generation after that. Subtle shifts in how genes are expressed, echoes of ancestral struggle carried forward in chemistry rather than code. It's inheritance beyond DNA, a softer kind of memory that flows through generations, sensitive to the world in ways that complement the slower work of genetic evolution. This is why organisms with identical DNA, twins who share every letter of their genetic text, can still grow into different people. The same genes, read with different emphases, expressed in different contexts, shaped by different environments, can produce different outcomes. Genes are not destiny. They're potential possibilities waiting to unfold. And epigenetics is part of how those possibilities get selected and realized across a lifetime. As you drift even deeper now, feeling your body relax more completely, picture a trait that began with one purpose and ended up serving another entirely. Like a tool repurposed, a road that leads somewhere unexpected. This is exaltation, and it's everywhere in the story of life. Those feathers we talked about earlier, soft insulators that later caught the air and became wings, the delicate bones in your ear that once hinged a reptilian jaw, the panda's thumb, which isn't really a thumb at all, but an enlarged wrist bone, perfectly suited now for stripping bamboo leaves, though it never evolved with that task in mind. Evolution doesn't design from a blank page. It improvises with what's already there, bending old structures toward new ends, finding unexpected uses for inherited forms. This is why biology so often feels like clever tinkering rather than purposeful engineering. The swim bladder that helps fish float likely began as a simple lung, a way to gulp air in oxygen-poor waters. Over time, in some lineages, it lost its breathing function and gained a new one, becoming a buoyancy control device, light and gas-filled, helping fish rise and sink with minimal effort. The panda's story is particularly charming in its awkwardness. True carnivores by ancestry, pandas shifted to a diet of bamboo, but their bodies didn't fully redesign for the task. Instead, evolution co-opted a wrist bone, stretched and thickened it, and created something that functions like an opposable thumb, good enough to grasp stems and strip leaves, even if it's not quite the elegant solution a true thumb might provide. It works, and in evolution, working is enough. This reveals something essential about how life changes. Evolution can't predict the future. It can't see what might be useful centuries or millennia down the line. It only responds to the present, using whatever materials are available, whatever mutations arise, whatever structures already exist. The path forward is always shaped by the path behind, and this creates a history written into every organism, a record not of optimal design, but of contingent modification, of making do and finding new uses for old tools. Let's linger for a moment on one more pattern that emerges from evolutionary history, the phenomenon of convergent evolution. We explored earlier, but from a different angle. When we see similar solutions arising independently in different lineages, it tells us something profound about the nature of biological problems and solutions. There are only so many ways to fly efficiently, only so many ways to see, only so many ways to extract energy from sunlight, or digest tough plant material. The fact that evolution keeps discovering the same solutions suggests that these solutions are, in some sense, optimal, or at least locally optimal, given the constraints of physics, chemistry, and biology. The shape of a fast-swimming marine predator, whether it's a shark, a dolphin, or an ichthyosaur, converges on a streamlined form because water creates specific physical challenges, and certain body shapes handle those challenges better than others. But convergence is never perfect. The details always differ, revealing the distinct evolutionary histories and constraints of each lineage. A dolphin's tail moves up and down, a shark's tail moves side to side. Both are effective, but they arose from different ancestral conditions, different starting points. Evolution is constrained by history even as it finds similar solutions to similar problems. There's something almost poetic about this. Life, faced with the same challenges in different times and places, keeps inventing similar answers, yet each invention carries the signature of its unique origin, a reminder that evolution is both creative and constrained, both flexible and bound by the past. As your thoughts grow softer still, drifting like clouds across a twilight sky, consider the deep connection between all living things revealed by molecular biology. The genetic code, the system by which DNA sequences are translated into proteins, is nearly universal. From bacteria to humans, the same triplets of DNA letters code for the same amino acids. This universality is powerful evidence for common ancestry. If life had multiple independent origins, we'd expect different genetic codes, but we find essentially the same code everywhere, with only minor variations, suggesting that all life descends from a single ancestor or a small group of closely related ancestors that lived billions of years ago. The proteins that perform basic cellular functions are also remarkably conserved. The enzymes that copy DNA, that translate genetic information into proteins, that generate energy in cells, all show deep similarities across vastly different organisms. A protein from a bacterium and a protein from a human, both performing the same function, often share recognizable sequence similarity and structural features. They're variations on ancient themes, modified over time, but still recognizably related. This molecular unity of life is one of the most profound discoveries of modern biology. Beneath all the diversity, all the adaptations, all the different forms and lifestyles, there's a shared heritage, a common toolkit of genes and proteins inherited from the earliest living things. We are all, in the most literal sense, related. The tree of life is not a metaphor. It's a genealogy, and every organism alive today sits on one of its billions of branches. There's also the quiet question of how one kind of organism becomes two, how a single lineage splits and diverges until it can no longer reunite. This splitting, this gradual separation usually begins with isolation. A river changes course and divides a forest. A few birds are blown by storm winds to a distant island. A mountain range rises slowly over millennia, splitting a valley population in two. Separated by geography, unable to exchange genes, these populations begin to wander down different evolutionary paths. Time does the rest. Mutations accumulate on both sides, different ones responding to different environments, different challenges, different accidents of chance. Generations pass, the populations drift apart, not suddenly, but slowly, like two boats untethered and carried by separate currents. Eventually, if they were ever brought back together, they might no longer recognize each other as mates. They might try to breed and fail, or produce offspring that don't survive, or that are healthy but sterile. At that point, they've crossed an invisible threshold. They've become separate species, branches that once touched but now reach in different directions. But speciation doesn't always require mountains or oceans. Sometimes it happens in surprising ways. In plants, an error during cell division can double the number of chromosomes in one generation, creating offspring that are suddenly reproductively isolated from their parents. These polyploid plants can't breed with the original population, but they can breed with each other. And in that single genetic accident, a new species is born, living side by side with its ancestors, but forever separated by chromosome count. Sexual selection, too, can drive populations apart. If two groups develop different preferences in mates, if one favors bright colors and another favors complex songs, individuals from each group might simply refuse to pair with the other, even if they live in the same forest, drink from the same streams. Over time, this choosiness reinforces genetic differences, deepening the divide until the groups are no longer one people but two, separated not by distance but by desire, by the quiet but powerful force of preference. The pace of speciation varies. Some species form slowly, accumulating differences grain by grain over millions of years. Others arise quickly, in bursts of change, in isolated populations or unusual circumstances. But the result is always the same. The branching continues. The tree of life grows more complex, each split creating new experiments, new variations, new ways of being alive. As you rest here, feeling the gentle rise and fall of your breath, know that this branching has been happening continuously for billions of years. Every species alive today is the temporary tip of a branch that extends back through time, splitting and splitting again, connecting to all other branches at various points in the past. You are connected to the bacteria in your gut, to the trees outside your window, to the birds in the sky, to the fish in the sea, all through this vast, ancient, ever-branching tree. The study of evolution is not just about understanding the past. It's about understanding how life works, how it responds to challenges, how it generates diversity, how it persists through changing conditions. It's about seeing patterns that connect all living things, about recognizing that the same principles that shaped dinosaurs and trilobites are still shaping life today, including us. And so, as your mind releases its hold on wakefulness, as your body settles into its deepest rest, as the stories and facts and examples all blur together and dissolve into formless peace, let this be your understanding that you are part of the story, not separate from it, not above it, but woven into it. A thread among countless others, brief but real, unique but connected, shaped by the same processes that shaped all life, resting now beneath the same stars that have witnessed every moment of that long, patient unfolding. The stories of evolution, the fish that walked on the land, the birds that descended from dinosaurs, the bacteria in your gut that helped you live, these are not separate from you. They're threads in the same tapestry, and you're a thread too, woven in among countless others. You don't need to understand it all. You can simply rest in the knowledge that you belong, that you're connected, that the same processes that shaped every living thing are still shaping you, gently, slowly, across generations. Let your breathing slow. Let your body grow heavier. Let your mind release its grip on words and images and ideas, allowing them to dissolve into the warm, formless space of approaching sleep. There's nothing you need to do, nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to remember. The universe is patient. Evolution is patient. Sleep well, rest deeply, and may you carry with you not the details, not the names or mechanisms, but simply a quiet sense of belonging, a soft awareness that you are home, here, now, part of the great branching tree of life that stretches back to the first cell and forward into an unknowable future, through countless challenges. You are part of that diversity. You belong here. Good night.